Mr. President. Mr. President, over 3 months have passed since Hamas committed the most widespread massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. 96 days have passed since Hamas butchered, incinerated, raped, and exterminated 1,300 Israelis in cold blood, since they brutally took 240 Israelis hostage. And today, nearly 100 days later, the General Assembly, nor any UN body, has not even condemned these horrors. Colleagues, on October 7th, little Kfir Bibas, who was taken hostage by Hamas along with his mother Shiri, his father Yarden, and his 4-year-old brother Ariel, was merely 9 months old. And for the last 3 months, he has been held in a dark Hamas terror tunnel. Many of you here are parents or grandparents, and you know it. Each milestone in your children's life is a celebration. Their first step, their first word, that first smile and laugh. Babies are a source of light and hope, a symbol of life. Yet Kfir, little baby Kfir, has become a symbol of the vilest cruelty known to man, the cruelty of Hamas. And tragically, Kfir is about to spend his first birthday as a hostage of Hamas. His first birthday. A quarter of Kfir's life has been spent as a hostage. He was kidnapped before he could even learn to say, Mom, Mama. Is he getting the food and vitamins he needs to grow up and develop, to grow and develop? Is he crawling? How can a baby be a target? A deliberate target? What kind of monsters intentionally take a baby hostage and treat him like an enemy? It is so painful that a baby is being held hostage by terrorists that instead of love, Kfir is surrounded by sheer evil. But above all, it is utterly heart-wrenching that to the UN, the pain of an innocent baby has been all but forgotten. For heaven's sake, a baby is about to spend his first birthday as a hostage. A hostage in the hands of the rapist murderers of Hamas. A sweet baby is being held hostage, and you prefer to discuss a ceasefire that will keep the Hamas Nazis that abducted him in power. Kfir is in the hands of Hamas, and you are focused on supplying aid to those that took him? How is bringing Kfir home not the top priority for the UN? How morally bankrupt has this body become? Yesterday, I spoke with members of Kfir's family. They cannot fathom how the whole world has not mobilized to ensure his release, how this room is not trembling with deafening calls to bring him home. Why are you not holding Hamas accountable for the most heinous war crimes? Hamas has not even permitted the Red Cross to visit Kfir. It is a stain not just upon the UN, but on each and every one of you. Despite the UN's moral rot, the citizens of Israel are resilient. We have faith, we have hope and unbreakable resolve, and we will continue fighting to defend ourselves. But sadly, if you ignore the suffering of our children, the suffering of little baby Kfir, I will stand here today and mark Kfir's first birthday. I will remind you of your moral obligation to fight for Kfir and his right to celebrate his birthday. Kfir, this birthday cake is for you. You are the reason Israel is fighting day and night. I only wish for you, for your first birthday, that next year, God willing, you will celebrate your birthday surrounded by the love of your family, and that we will live in a world where the suffering of Israeli babies is important to the UN. Mr. President, I ask that Kfir's cake remain here as a painful reminder, so that every speaker today remembers Kfir and our duty to bring him home. The UN, an organization that remains silent when babies are taken hostage and women are viciously raped, has become an accomplice of terrorists. And if the UN is an accomplice to terrorists, it has no justification to exist. Look at Kfir. Imagine this was your child. Would you stop fighting to bring him home? Not in a million years. Colleagues, Kfir is one of 136 hostages held in Gaza. When you make empty declarations calling for the release of hostages while continuing to focus only on ceasefire and situation in Gaza, you quickly forget that every hostage is an entire universe. These are brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, grandparents and friends. 21-year-old Almog Meir Jan is a fun and loving son and grandson. He spent the Friday night before he was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival taking care of his grandfather. He loves music, soccer, and he wants to study computer science. 23-year-old Eviatar David is a musician. He plays the guitar. He loves jamming with his brother Eli and sister Yaela. He's warm, modest. Orit Meir and Galia David, the mothers of Almog and Eviatar, are here with us today. They are watching and they are waiting. They are waiting for their sons to come home. But they're also waiting for you to act. You are failing them. This picture, I hope you've seen it. This picture was on the front page of the Daily Mail yesterday. Look at these girls. Look at them. These are the before and after pictures of Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, and Agam Berger, who were taken hostage by Hamas. See how the hope in their eyes has turned to horror, and how their smiling faces have been beaten and bloodied after violent abuse. Look at their faces. Why are you silent? What have you done here to bring them home? Nothing. Colleagues, Hamas Nazis viciously raped Israeli women before executing them and used sexual violence as a weapon of war. CNN, the New York Times, and many other media outlets published extensive evidence of Hamas's sexual violence. But here, at the UN, the body that supposedly represents the bastion of human rights, silence. Silence. Israeli women are not women, and Israeli children are not children. I cannot imagine what all the hostages, women and men, are suffering right now. It breaks my heart to think about it. What if your children was held hostage? Your sister or brothers? What would you expect the UN to do? What would you expect the world to do? Surely not continue with this shameful indifference. So colleagues, rather than focusing on bringing the hostages home, rather than making this the primary goal for the past 96 days, you know what happened? UN agencies, UN bodies, UN officials have been obsessed only with the well-being of Gazans. Only. These are the people that voted for Hamas. These are the people that overwhelmingly support the massacre, the murder and the raping of our women, the burning of our babies. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are displaced, either because their communities were decimated by Hamas or because Hezbollah has rained rockets down on their homes completely unprovoked. But you ignore all Israeli victims. After all, they're Israeli, and to the UN, Israeli victims are probably not victims. The UN has become another tool of war in the arsenal of terrorists, and every single UN agency and body has been weaponized against Israel. The UN has become the epitome of dystopian reality. And South Africa's baseless and libelous cases at the ICJ proves this exactly. How can it be, remember it, that the Convention on the Prevention of Genocide, adopted following the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jewish people, is now being weaponized against the Jewish state while serving the Hamas terrorists that perpetrated the October 7th massacre and that are committed in their charter to repeating the Holocaust? Is this normal? Even irony has now died a thousandth death. There are no morals here, only bias and hypocrisy. I scream it from the rooftops, but the UN doesn't care. Sadly, you don't care. It's so clear. All one needs to do is look at the General Assembly's central goal for the last 3 months: to keep the Hamas rapist in power. This is the meaning of a ceasefire. By calling for a ceasefire, this is exactly what you are doing. A ceasefire is a victory for Hamas, nothing more. It is an opportunity for Hamas to rearm, regroup, and recommit as they declared the atrocities of October 7th. A green light for Hamas to continue their reign of terror in Gaza. The damage the UN is causing extends far beyond the conflicts in Gaza. Believe me, you are setting a murderous precedent, because by calling for a ceasefire while hardly noting the hostages and crimes perpetrated by Hamas, you are sending a clear message to terrorists all around the world. You are also encouraging Hezbollah. You are empowering the Houthis and their puppet master in Tehran. And very soon you and we will all deeply regret this. The UN is signaling to terrorists that rape as a weapon of war is fine. That taking babies hostage has no international repercussions. Colleagues, again and again and again, you only focus on a ceasefire and limiting Israel, tying Israel's hands in the fight against terror. Because the UN suffers from what we call the streetlight effect. And you want to know what is this streetlight effect? I'll tell you. It's a phenomenon that makes you do only what is easy, not what's productive or useful, only what is easy. And here is a parable that will clarify this with a story. A drunk man is stumbling around under a streetlight at night, looking for his keys that he lost. Then a police officer approaches him and begins to help him to search for his keys. But after a couple of minutes, the police officer turns to the man and asks, "Well, I cannot see your keys anywhere. Are you sure that you lost them here under the street lamp, under the street light?" Well, the drunk man turns to the officer and says, "No, sorry, I lost them in the park, but it's pitch black in the park, so I'm looking for them here, because I can see under the streetlight. Distinguished colleagues, the UN today is the drunk man. The UN, with its bias, is always searching only under the same streetlight, following its distorted moral compass. You don't have the courage, sadly, to combat terror and radicalism. You don't have the resolve to truly care about human rights, to fight for women, fight for children, or fight for the hostages. But let me be clear, there is nothing to be found under the streetlight. It's just easier to spend your time there. It is much easier to make demands of the law-abiding democracy of Israel. We are your streetlight. It's so simple to blame Israel, but it's so much more challenging to condemn the Hamas terrorists, which have turned Gaza into a terror war machine under the UN's nose for 17 years. Hamas, yes, which uses civilian infrastructure and schools, mosques, hospitals to store weapons, to fire rockets from within civilian areas. Take a stand against the terrorists using millions of Gazans as human shields, once and for all. We don't need your calls for humanitarian aid. We're doing it anyway. Israel is facilitating the entry of aid into Gaza every day. We support every single humanitarian initiative. We facilitated field hospitals, floating hospitals. We are facilitating the entry of fuel to hospitals and bakeries and everything. Every critical infrastructure. Not a single shipment of food or water is held up or turned around. But you know who's delaying the humanitarian aid? Hamas terrorists. They are looting critical aid before it even reaches the people of Gaza. Yet, you are incapable of dealing with Hamas. And you know why? Why? Because to Hamas, you don't even exist. They don't recognize the existence of international law. Can you confront the Hamas terrorists? Sadly, this is not one of the solutions under the streetlight. Mr. President, the time has come for member states to drag the UN out from under the streetlight and not the other way around. The time has come to focus on bringing Kfir, baby Kfir, and all the hostages home. Bring them home, for holding Hamas fully accountable for the situation in Gaza, for showing terrorists around the globe that the international community doesn't stay silent in the face of evil. Perhaps if you told the people of Gaza who is truly responsible for their suffering, who started this war, who's exploiting them, they would rise up against Hamas and end their reign of terror. And if you want a real ceasefire, a real one that can last forever, then demand it from Hamas. Tell them to turn themselves in. Tell them to release the hostages. And this war would end immediately. This is the only ceasefire you should be advancing. Thank you, Mr. President.